The first few days of NFL free agency have now been and gone, and some teams are definitely faring better than others. So here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Starting with the good, we have the Chicago Bears, and the reason why they're here is because they have a new offensive line. They've acquired 3 new offensive linemen in this free agency period alone. Jonah Jackson, the offensive guard from the Rams, who they got for a 6th. Joe Tooney, obviously the star guard from the Chiefs. They traded a 2026 4th for him. And Drew Dalman, the center from the Falcons. They gave him a 3-year, $42 million contract with $28 million guaranteed. Reportedly, interestingly, it took less money to sign him because he wanted to work with Ben Johnson. As a whole, the offensive line is a weak link unit. What I mean by that is that if there is one bad offensive lineman on your offensive line, the rest of the unit is kind of going to get exposed by that single weak link. And last year, the Bears' offensive line allowed 37 sacks, which was the league highest total. And in particular, it was the interior offensive line, which was just an absolute mess. Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones, the 2 offensive tackles, weren't perfect by any means. But again, when you're playing with an offensive line where 3/5 of it are basically terrible, then you're also going to inevitably struggle. I'm happy to definitely give them more of a chance. I think they actually played pretty decently in quite terrible circumstances, to be perfectly honest with you. Dalman is a rock-solid, really versatile, well-rounded center who can fit any sort of scheme. He missed 9 games last year due to an ankle injury, but in the 8 he played, he only allowed 10 pressures and no sacks. So already that offensive line has been massively upgraded. And why that's really important for the Bears and why I think they're a massive winner because of this free agency period is because everyone was saying that from the Lions to the Bears, Ben Johnson might struggle because he doesn't have that offensive line, which he needs really to run the offensive system that he likes to run. And that's definitely true. Well, now the Bears have a new offensive line. They have a pretty good offensive line, I might add. And the offensive line is something that you just need it to be average. And the Bears was terrible last year. They've now got a good to average offensive line, depending on how all of those guys work together. Obviously, with offensive line, you need chemistry. So on paper, at least, they now have a good offensive line. It remains to be seen if it becomes one. But fundamentally, the offensive line was so essential to rebuild this offseason because they need to get the most out of Caleb Williams. They've got a talented quarterback, what I think is a talented quarterback on a rookie contract. And this is kind of their window. I know it seems a bit extreme to say that about the Bears, who were absolutely awful last year and are picking 10th this year. But they have Rome Odunze. They have Caleb Williams. They have Ben Johnson. They have a better offensive line. There's some pieces on that defense they can build around. And they could add someone with that 10th overall pick that could really elevate that roster even further. They could add Ashton Genty, say. So for me, the Bears are a massive, massive winner here. Remains to be seen how well they actually perform, which is why I think free agency can only be capped at a good, but they're definitely winners. The second winners and the second team in this good category are the Minnesota Vikings. It is officially J.J. McCarthy season. Sam Darnold has left and they've not bought a quarterback in or even kept Daniel Jones, which I actually think is quite a bold move. I know that J.J. McCarthy would have been in the meeting room and absorbing the offensive system by osmosis, but he wouldn't have been able to practice. You're not able to practice if you are put on IR for the whole season, if you are good to practice, even if you have recovered from an injury. So he's not been on the field getting those practice reps, let alone live reps, which really I think he still need. I thought that McCarthy would have to sit for 2 years. I obviously can't sit this year now. It is his turn. It's his chance. He looked really good in preseason last year. But I still think I would have brought in someone as a potential bridge, maybe just to give him a little bit more time. Someone like a Jacoby Brissett maybe, or kept Daniel Jones. But ultimately, the reason why I think they feel good rolling into the season with JJ McCarthy is because they've got a new and improved offensive line like the Bears. They've got Ryan Kelly, the center from the Colts, signed him to a 2-year, $18 million deal with $9 million guaranteed. They also signed Will Freeze, the offensive guard from the Colts, to a 5-year, $88 million deal. They've also got Christian Darrisaw back healthy, presumably. So the offensive line is good to go. Obviously, McCarthy will have the weapons. Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison. Probably the best weapons in the league. And he's got the coaching in Kevin O'Connell. And now, as I said, has the offensive line. So offensively, it's all there. And defensively, they've also made some good moves. They retained Byron Murphy, their cornerback, to a 3-year, $54 million deal. They've brought in 2 defensive tackles in Jonathan Allen to a 3-year, $51 million deal, and Javon Hargrave, I don't know what that is at the time of recording this. And look, are either of them massive needle movers? Probably not, but it's good to have that, to bring in that kind of talent. Javon Hargrave is 32, granted, but he had 64 pressures in 2023. They still have Van Ginkel, Ivan Pace, Blake Cashman, Dallas Turner, still got Brian Flores. And there's a lot to be excited about, I think, if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan at this point in the year, with what they've added, with JJ McCarthy's potential and what this team could look like, really, with what we saw from them last year with Sam Darnold, who a lot of people hated on. Let it be known that I was big on Sam Darnold. I said it on this podcast in the summer, on this channel, in the summer. So make sure you subscribe for great takes like that. But I don't want the Vikings to get ahead of themselves and Vikings fans to get ahead of themselves here. I think we still need to see what we're going to get from JJ McCarthy. He's the unknown quantity here, right? He's essentially a rookie quarterback. And as talented as he may be, we never know what we're going to get with rookie quarterbacks, even in a situation as great as Minnesota. So a lot to be excited about. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves, Vikings fans. My third winners and my third team in this good category are the Denver Broncos. And it's simply because they've made their strength stronger. They've taken the Eagles mantra, if you will, and have added Talanoa Hufanga, the safety from San Francisco, to a 3-year, $45 million deal with $20 million guaranteed. And Dre Greenlaw, the 49ers linebacker, to 3 years, $35 million deal. And they had the best defense in the league last year, the Broncos. They had Pat Surtain, obviously a completely revamped defense from what it was years ago. And Hufanga upgrades PJ Locke, who was, I think, a weak link on that Broncos defense. Dre Greenlaw obviously coming off the Achilles tear in the Super Bowl. So he's kind of like probably the highest upside, highest reward potential of these free agents, I think. Like, he's one of the best coverage linebackers in the league when he's healthy. And in the draft, that means the Broncos can just focus on getting more weapons for Bo Nix. And that's really what they need to do, I think, because Bo Nix, as I've said before, good quarterback. Broncos fans don't come for me. But I think he is the level of quarterback whereby if you surround him with better talent, he will become better. So not to say that the Broncos are now going to suddenly go out in the draft and only draft offensive weapons, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, whatever it might be. But it does allow them to focus their efforts on that if those players are available at the right time. And really for me, the Broncos being on this list, being in this good category and looking at their depth chart now and kind of how they're looking for the draft and for this offseason, they've quietly got a pretty good roster now there. Like, it really dawned on me how quickly the Broncos have managed to turn this around from the depths of depravity that this team was in under Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson. So Broncos are big winners. And my final team in this good category, the final winners of free agency for me, are the Las Vegas Raiders. And that's primarily because of the Geno Smith trade. They traded him for a 2025 third round pick. And it's just a fantastic move because it's a good short to medium term answer at quarterback for a team which frankly hasn't had a quarterback or hasn't had decent level quarterback play really since like the heyday of Derek Carr, Michael Crabtree, and Cooper. Took me a while. And what's great about this move is that they haven't really spent a lot to acquire Geno Smith, right? They haven't traded a first round pick for him. The contract which I'm sure he'll sign with them remains to be seen. But frankly, in terms of draft capital, they're not massively tied down to him. If it was a first round pick, then they'd have to, they couldn't easily move on from him if they found a replacement. Third round pick, you can definitely do that. They've also re-signed Max Crosby. They've re-signed Malcolm Kuntz. They've obviously still got Christian Wilkins. They've brought in Jeremy Chin, a safety I personally really like. Offensively, they've got Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, a decent offensive line, Pete Carroll now. There's a lot to like about the Raiders. Genuinely a lot to like. They were missing one piece. That was the quarterback, and they've addressed it. And now we're on to the bad. And the first team that's in this bad category, a loser, if you will, are the Green Bay Packers. And that is for one move and one move alone. And that is the fact that they signed Aaron Banks, the offensive guard, to a 4-year, $77 million deal. Now, the Packers were not a team that was rolling around in cap space, don't get me wrong, but they had the chance to make some upgrades. They need talent at a lot of key positions. They need alphas at wide receiver, cornerback, and definitely edge. And even despite those needs, they were one of the better teams last year. They only lost to, I think, the Eagles, the Vikings, and the Lions, three of the better teams in the league. So the Packers are nearly there, but signing Banks is a lateral move, I think, over Sean Ryan, who's currently a third-round pick who was developing at guard and wasn't setting the world on fire, don't get me wrong, but guard was not a massive hole that they needed to address in free agency. I personally believe that free agency is where you either want to make your strength stronger and go for a push, or you want to address holes so that when you get into the draft, you don't have to draft a certain player at a certain point. The Packers didn't achieve either of those things with this signing. And again, it's a guard. It's not one of those valuable positions that they need to address, like wide receiver, edge, or cornerback. And it's just an odd choice to make this the Packers' big move of the offseason. Like Brian Gutekunst is just kind of outsmarting himself. What has saved this, though, from being an ugly move, an ugly team, is because it is just a single move. And because I do like the Nate Hobbs signing, the cornerback signed into 4 years, $48 million, $16 million guaranteed. And he's a good player, fills a need before the draft. The contract is really well structured. It's a low risk. So the Packers aren't massive losers. They're not some of the awful teams that we're going to come on to in a few moments' time. Definitely haven't come out covered in glory, though. This next team kind of hurts me to put in the bad category because I actually quite like a lot of the moves they've made, but one move kind of tips it back into this bad category, and that is the New England Patriots. The moves that I like, obviously the Milton Williams signing, the defensive tackle from the Eagles, signed him to a big 4-year, $100 million deal. He was probably the top free agent in this class, 54 pressures last year, 8 sacks, but he was more of a rotational guy, so it remains to be seen how he will fare in a full-time starting role. Also, they signed Robert Spillane, the linebacker from the Raiders. I really like Robert Spillane. I think he's a very underrated linebacker. He's quietly been really great for the Las Vegas Raiders the last 2 years, especially against the run and as a pass rusher. So it's a slept-on good move, I think. And Morgan Moses they've added. Again, another good move, good offensive line depth. When you draft a young offensive lineman in the early rounds, it does take them a while to develop, even those you'll take in the first round. Even someone like Will Campbell, right? The learning curve from college to the league is massive for offensive line. So it doesn't mean that the Patriots won't address offensive line in the first round potentially, but it does give them some wiggle room. And then this is why it's ugly, though. Harold Landry, the edge rusher from the Titans, signed into a 3-year, $43.5 million deal with $26 million guaranteed. So yes, there are moves I do like, but there's a combination of a few red flags here. The Harold Landry deal is a big red flag for me, but also from last year, passing on Lad McConkey in favor of drafting Jalen Polk, Javon Baker not seeing the field, someone I genuinely liked in last year's draft class as well. So it could be put down to bad coaching with Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. Maybe we've not seen the best that they can give. But there's just a few too many red flags here for me with the Patriots front office, especially going into the draft. So for me, they just creep into this bad category. The final bad team is the Seattle Seahawks. Now, what saved them from going into the ugly category is the fact that Sam Darnold is a good quarterback. They signed him to a 3-year, $100 million deal, $55 million guaranteed. I think he's kind of overhated now, actually. I know that the Vikings season ended pretty badly because of some bad performances from Sam Darnold, but overall I think Darnold is a better quarterback than what we saw towards the end of last season. And I also really like the signing of Ernest Jones, the linebacker, 3 years, $33 million, $15 million guaranteed. He's the kind of linchpin of Mike McDonald's defense in the same way that Roquan Smith was. Both were traded for mid-season and both were kept on long-term. And I like both of those moves, but I don't really understand the vision that the Seahawks are having here, frankly. They've lost DK Metcalf, they released Tyler Lockett, they traded away Geno Smith. So it looked like before the Darnold trade that the Seahawks were positioning themselves for a full offensive rebuild. But then they signed Sam Darnold, a quarterback who is much more prone to playing worse under pressure, to their team, which has a bad interior offensive line, maybe one of the worst in the league, and then made no moves, at least at this point at recording, then made no moves in free agency to address that offensive line. They've not made moves like the Vikings or the Bears, for example. So I just don't really see where the Seahawks are going with it. I like the players they added, but the bigger picture isn't quite adding up to me. That's why they're in the bad category. And last and definitely least, we now have the ugly. These are the teams that have really come out bad from this free agency period, and there's 3 of them. And unfortunately, we're going to start with my Houston Texans. We don't have an offensive line, and we don't really have a way to get one. We traded away Laramie Tunsil for a haul, 2025 third round pick, 2025 seventh round pick, and then a second and a fourth round pick in 2026. Don't get me wrong, Laramie Tunsil was not an angel last year, right? He led the league in penalties and he had his own issues. But again, offensive line is a weak link unit. And when he's the only decent player on an offensive line which has four other guys on it, he's also going to struggle. Now, apparently, there was some kind of like locker room questions that apparently Lance Zierlein reported that Tunsil had to kind of be negotiated back onto the field at points. And there were definitely times last year where CJ Stroud was inexplicably lying on the floor after being sacked and no one was really helping him up. So I think there's more behind the scenes with the Tunsil trade than just the on-field performance. But that's still kind of crazy to me. Like, to let that go, to let a player like Tunsil go when you already have a bad offensive line and need an offensive line replacement already, not even him, but for the other four guys, basically. We also traded away Kenyon Green for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Not a good player, not a good pick, but we've lost two offensive linemen and we've brought nobody in. And CJ Stroud is a pocket passing quarterback. I know he weirdly kind of became a bit more of a rushing threat last year. You know, he was getting like 20 rushing yards a game. He's not that kind of quarterback, though, right? He's not an Anthony Richardson. He's not a Lamar Jackson. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not a Josh Allen. Not even a Justin Herbert, I would say. Like, CJ Stroud is literally your classic pocket passer. You do not want this guy putting himself at harm's risk and taking big hits by rolling out of the pocket and trying to pick up some yards with his legs. So to trade away these offensive line pieces, which I'm not saying are going to fix the offensive line at all, but what that does do for the Texans is it massively pigeonholes us in the draft now. We have to, at pick 25, somehow wrangle a starting offensive lineman, which to me suggests that we're going to package this Tunsil haul and trade up. But I don't know who's going to fall, really. Like, Amar Membu, I would love Amar Membu. I would love Kelvin Banks. I would love Will Campbell. I don't think those guys are going to be available at, say, pick 15. Not when you've got teams like the 49ers and the Dolphins all picking before, who also need offensive line. And it's a premium position where teams will just draft the talent that's on the board. And if it's offensive line, well, great. They might have an offensive line like the Eagles. So really don't get that. I get that it was not a good unit and that Tunsil might not be the answer long term. But getting rid of him doesn't help us. I'll put it that way. And then we just signed a bunch of NPC wide receivers. Christian Kirk remains the classic free agent signing. Like, you bring in Christian Kirk, great, you got a wide receiver 2.5. Fantastic. And we've also brought in Justin Watson and Braxton Berrios. What's going to happen with Stephon Diggs? We don't know. But the bottom line for me here, guys, is our current, as of the 12th of March at 5:30. So for Americans, that's going to be, what, like 2:30? Our current starting, how's my maths there? Don't know. The Texans' current starting lineup at offensive line. Blake Fisher at left tackle. Okay, maybe. Laken Tomlinson at guard. The Seattle Seahawk reject. Jarrett Patterson, Juice Scruggs, Titus Howard. That's one of the worst offensive lines in the league. And we might be cooked. The second team joining the Texans in this ugly category is the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's because they're trying to win a Super Bowl with both hands tied behind their backs, it seems. The Bengals owners, the Brown family, are not cash rich. And basically, I had to do a bit of digging because this is a bit in the weeds, and there are probably smarter people out there who understand this more than me. So if I'm misspeaking, feel free to correct me in the comments. But my limited understanding of the whole contract and guaranteed money malarkey is that when you guarantee a player's contract, it has to go into an escrow account, basically meaning that money's on hold, it's on ice by a third party. So it can't be touched until that player gets that money. That means, though, that you have to have that cold, hard cash to be able to put in that account. You have to have it's not just about assets, you have to have the liquidity, basically. And the Bengals owners don't have that to hand. So compared to let's say the Eagles, who are paying everyone, Jeffrey Lurie is writing checks faster than he knows what to do with them. they are able to keep their players. They are able to play their players. And I know they've lost a lot of defensive players this year, but fundamentally, the Eagles are a really cash-rich team, and they understand how the cap's going to go up, and understand TV deals and all this malarkey that, again, smarter people than me know about. Brett Coleman was talking about this a lot, and he's fantastic. So go and listen to one of his videos if you don't really understand what I'm saying. Frankly, I don't know that much either. But the bottom line here, to bring you back from talking about economics, the bottom line here is that I don't think the Bengals, who have already given Trey Hendrickson the permission to seek a trade, I don't think they're going to then be able to keep Chase and Higgins. They're never financially aggressive. Jamar Chase will want to be paid like the highest non-quarterback in the league, which this offseason has been reset. That market has been reset by Myles Garrett. So by waiting on that deal, they've shot themselves in the foot because that price has gone up. T. Higgins, again, double franchise tag, and he's going to want a lot of money. And from a team building perspective, not keeping your best edge rusher and keeping your wide receiver 2, for as good as T. Higgins is, and I love T. Higgins, but he is a wide receiver 1.5, right? Chase is the 1. Why are you letting Hendrickson go? The Bengals owners are going to stop this team from ever getting close again to a Super Bowl with the way they have to build their roster. It's the modern NFL. You need money, you need lots of it, and you need to be willing to spend it, and spend it early and aggressively. The Bengals tick none of those boxes. I have no idea what they're going to do long term. And finally, my final ugly team, I'm sorry to say it, is the San Francisco 49ers. And it's because the Super Bowl window, as you guys knew it for the last 3-4 years, it's now closed. It's gone. And it's not to say that you can't win one with Brock Purdy. This isn't me hating on Brock Purdy. I think he's an absolutely fine quarterback. This has nothing to do with Brock Purdy at all. It's right that the 49ers are paying him. But you've just lost basically everyone else, right? Deebo Samuel, Dre Greenlaw, Tanalo Hufanga, Travarius Ward, Aaron Banks, Carl Juszczyk, Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, even backups like Jalen Moore and Elijah Mitchell. Like, Purdy had to get paid. And that means you can't, and paid more than minimum wage. And that means that those other players have to go. And the 49ers do draft very well. Trey Lance, not included here. And Kyle Shanahan is a great head coach, and Robert Saleh as DC, I love that. But let's call a spade here. This is essentially a rebuild without having to find a quarterback, which isn't as extreme as a full-on rebuild. Don't get me wrong. We can call it a retooling, or, another better PR word for rebuilding. But fundamentally, this 49ers team is having a reset. And that doesn't mean they're not going to be successful going forward, but it does mean that this free agency period has been pretty ugly, with basically the whole team leaving. So we'll find out what's going to happen to the 49ers this season. But right now, they're in this ugly category. And frankly, along with the Texans and the Bengals, they all deserve to be. But who are your winners and losers from NFL free agency? Let me know down below in the comments, and make sure you subscribe for more content.